Hi everyone. In this tutorial, I'm going to quickly go over how to diagram and communicate your aggregations, components, and connection logic. So I'm going to be using this diagram communication Rhino file as well as just the orientation constraint Grasshopper file. So what I'll be showing you today is really how you might go about communicating on a basic level your components, the scale of the components. I'm not going to go too much into this prefab just yet, or the plans. That'll be for a later tutorial, but more focusing on the connection logics of your components, as well as then how you show it in your presentations, as well as your breaking these connections up into how they're connecting with each other in these micro chunks, and then looking at this larger kind of chunk communication. So when you open up this file, you'll see that we've got our detailed component that we're working with, and it's got our connection logics in them. So I like to have a wood texture on my components, just so we know that it's like we're working with the material of prefab timber. So to do that, if you don't know, in Rhino, you can basically right-click on in your layers, go to wood material, click this to create new material, custom, and then navigate down to color and click to assign texture. It's going to ask you to assign a wood texture, so we're going to use this one. And then all you need to do is select your material, right click on the texture material you've just created, and then click assign to objects. One thing I'll note is that it's important to get the scale of your material correct. So if we go to properties and navigate to this texture mapping button and then box map, we can then change the scale. So if I click 4 meters by 4 meters by 4 meters and then press capped yes, you'll see the scale of the component changes. So that's important as well. So to begin with, I'm going to show you how to get the component connections that you're using from Grasshopper out into Rhino. So if we open up Grasshopper and we go to the particular connection rules, you'll see when we're working, we've got, I'm just going to turn this off. When we're working, we've got in our rule generator, we've got all our components, but we don't necessarily want to just show all of them. We want to show the ones that we've selected. So there's an easy way to do this. All we need to do is get the list item component. We can get this geometry, and I'm going to create a new layer, connection, comp, and I'm just going to bake these to that layer. So now you can see we've got our connection, the rules that we're using. So I'm going to just group all these, just so we have them grouped. And you might have more that you might use. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure I'm just going to organize them on the grid. just use the align command to align them. So now we've got our, basically, our connections that we're using, and we're going to also align them concentrically. Oh, no. So we've got our connections that we're using. So one way that we can now go and diagram this is if I apply this material that we've mapped, I'll just hide this. We can, if I just, we can then go in into Isometric View. And potentially we want to move this down. Right, so this is kind of the same connection, so we probably don't need this one. So we can then go in and we can, view capture the file. These connection logics, press OK, and then we can call them a name, connection diagram, basic. So that's kind of one way where we can get just the connections that we're using, and then we might also go into top view so we can see them from here. And maybe we want to turn off the shadows as well, so we can see the types of connections. And I might just move this way. So that's one way of doing it, and that's a good way just to communicate, which connections you're actually using. The next way that we'll look at is also then how do we do these exploded connections. So I'm going to copy one away and just work with this. I'm going to ungroup the connection. And I'm going to just drag this connection, this component to the right. So we've roughly got our connection, right? So now what we want to do is we want to view capture the file this. So I'm going to view capture the file and do exploded connection diagram. And then we're going to open up it in Illustrator. So we're going to open up Illustrator. Oh. We're going to go File, New, and we're going to do just an A4 landscape. And then we're going to place this on the canvas. So I'm going to use this. It might be big, so we're going to just scale this down. Okay, so now we've got our wood block, right? So I'm going to create a new layer. I'm just going to lock this. And so I want to draw those connection lines. So I'm just going to get a pen tool and I'm going to make it as parallel as I can. And then I can hold Alt and then copy that down to each other. And same with this here. I want to make sure these lines sort of parallel, and then I'm gonna change the stroke on this so it's the line weights are nice. Make this dashed, and we might make the dash a bit smaller. 3, and we're going to give it some arrows. So immediately we've got now just a quick way of showing the connections, and we might even change this to be smaller. And then what we want to do is we want to show the connection point. So we know roughly that our connection point is kind of in the center here. We're not going to have this. I'm going to make this black. Okay. Again. We got the stroke. Black. And we might need to skew this slightly. So we've got our connection point. So that's one way of having this. So I'm just going to move this to the side. So that's one piece of information that we might, have. The next piece of information that we might put on this is if we go back into our top view and we just hide this. We just do a view capture the file of our component. So it's our basic component. And then I'm going to place this here. I might just crop the image slightly. And we'll rotate it. So we've got a plan top view of the component. And then we can also assign our connection logics here as well. So we could potentially look at having these kind of connection markers of where the connections are. So we've got a connection here in top view and here. And then we might do a tag, with connection 001 or just 001. We'll change this. So the key thing here is just like you treat design, when you lay out a diagram or communication, it's really important that you use the same judgment as how you're designing, because communication itself is very important in terms of presenting your projects. So another thing we might do is then go back in here. Let's go to our in parallel view. We're going to go back to our diagram, and we might just hide our connection directions and connection points, and we might just view capture the file this axo of component, and then we can put that in as well. And we'll place that. So we've got this diagram just showing us one basic connection, and then we've got another, group this, showing us the top view of the connections. You know, maybe we might make this a little bit smaller. So we want to think about hierarchy on the page. You know, we might also want to show a few other pieces of information. So the on here, we've got another connection logic. Or we don't have to. And then we also want to maybe place our components, connection diagram, basic component that we're using. So these are all the kind of connections that we're using. Down. So now we've got our basic connections, our top view of the connection, and then we might want to, you know, change this to be here or something. Maybe this goes up here, this goes here, and this goes here. So this is just a basic way of being able to show aggregations. I'll show you one that I've prepared. Oh, no. So here's another one where it's showing basically the aggregation chunk, how the aggregation is working. So those kind of 4 components, and then which connection faces that they're being used. So that's a really simple way to achieve these kind of quick diagrams, and we want to lay them out in a way where where it's sort of like a taxonomy showing us the different connection logics. So another good example of that is let me get it up. In some of our previous projects, we've got students have developed this kind of communication style. Just find it is, where they're showing us the kind of taxonomy of their components, also the component library that they're designing. They're also showing us all the different components, and then they're also showing us, in this case, kind of a GIF form, how the components are connecting. So that's an important way of showing individual components. It's important to show us the dimensions, the scale. You can even show us the the voxel that you're working with under as well as part of the diagram. And then as well as that, moving into, say, the kind of aggregations themselves. Hopefully this works. Oh, yep. Go back to this. So looking at the aggregations themselves, if we increase this, a good way if you want to quickly aggregate, we can basically start taking our, baking our geometry out. So shell, I'm just going to call this shells, and then I'm going to call this glazing, and then we can bake that to glazing, also shells, and bake this to glazing. Let's go in here. Just move this to the side. Oh. And I'm going to just change this to cyan. So we're going to select these objects, and then we're going to apply just a glass, and we're going to then select our shells, and we're going to apply our wood. We'll go into rendered mode, and we'll see if I switch off grasshopper, pretty off, and I've got to put shadows back on. Go. So now you can see it's a very simple way of getting our aggregation. So we can just then go and view capture the file, call it study 001. And it's important to try to capture as many kind of angles of your aggregation. So we want to capture as much as possible in order to communicate this, basically, this aggregation. So even kind of, the top view of it, etc. So that's a quick way, without kind of using rendering just yet, to diagram and visualize your aggregations in some sort of materiality. Cool. I will see you guys in the next tutorial.